Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're continuing the repairs on this Australian delivered 2001 Cobra Mustang. If you're new to the channel and you like working on your own cars, consider subscribing, as I make a lot of car DIY videos that I do at home in my own garage. There are no fancy hoists here or fancy equipment, and I document everything I do so that you too can get the inspiration to work on your own cars at home, if that's what you get a kick out of, like I do. Alright, today we're continuing the repairs on this 2001 New Age Cobra Mustang. We've already done several repairs on this car and we're getting it ready for a roadworthy inspection, which is due at the end of the week. So today the repairs will be the front ball joints and tie rod ends. If you want to see a step-by-step guide on how to do this job yourself, then make sure you follow along today. And if you like what you see, consider clicking the like button and subscribe to see more content from me later on. Alright, with that all said, these are the tools you're going to need.
Get a jack and a jack stand ready, as you will be removing the front wheels. You're going to need a ball joint puller kit. Either rent one of these or they are readily available on eBay and Amazon. Then you'll need some penetrating fluid, some grease for the joints. I've got a small hook to hang up my brake calipers, some safety gear for your hands and eyes, a light, a hammer, some paper towel or rags, a small brush to clean some of the dirt away, a pry bar or a ratchet gun will help a lot. Have a small pair of pliers ready, a knife, a pencil, or something to write with, a 21, 19, 18, 15mm long sockets, a 24, 27mm regular sockets. You're going to need an E8 socket, a 15mm socket, and one of these crowfoot sockets as a 22mm will help out a lot. Then you'll need a 15mm spanner and a shifter as well. Finally, have a torque wrench ready, as well as a ratchet and some extensions.
Alrighty guys, you are now picking up this video in the afternoon. Yes, while you were watching what tools you're going to need, 3 hours had passed. And that's because I've already done one side. And now I can show you a video that includes all the little tips and tricks needed if you ever want to follow along and replace the ball joints and the tie rod ends on your own Mustang. So I've got my tools here sprawled all over the floor from the first side of the car, so we're ready to go. And the first thing will be to take off your wheel.
And once you have the wheel off, we'll get the brake caliper out of the way by removing these two 15mm bolts. Now just take a hook or some wire and hang up your brake caliper out of the way. Next, we're going to remove the tie rod end by undoing this nut. The nut is held on by a locking pin, so remove that and use an 18mm socket to take the bolt off. Now, before we remove this bolt completely, we'll loosen up the tie rod end here using a large shifting spanner. And now we're ready to break this taper joint loose. So to do that, get a large hammer and hit the bottom of the hub here. This will force the taper joint to pop out. Now just undo the nut and your tie rod end is free. We're going to count the number of revolutions when we take this off, so that we can put the new one on using the same number of turns. Count this on your own car as well, as your number of turns may be different to mine, and in fact the turns may be different from one side to the other. Mine needed 28 turns on this side and I'm making a note of that on the box of the new tie rod end here, so that when I put this new one on, I know exactly how many turns I need. Okay, I'll put the new tie rod end on later. I'll be swapping out the ball joints too, so I'm going to do that now. To start with, I'll remove the nut holding the sway bar end link to the lower control arm, because we'll be dropping the control arm down. Now get your brake line hoses loose from their fitting here, and using a 21mm socket, loosen the top strut bolt, which will let you take this brake line bracket off of your strut. With the brake line now completely free of the strut, it's time to get the hub disconnected from the strut tower. Have a jack supporting the lower control arm from this point onwards, and take out the two strut bolts. With the hub and the strut now disconnected, we'll get the ABS sensor out of the way as well with an E8 socket. With that gone too, it's really only the ball joint nut that's holding the wheel hub in place. So let's drop the jack down to get more access, and using a 24mm socket, let's get the bolt off. I'm going to apply penetrating fluid to this taper joint and let it soak for a good hour. As you can imagine, this joint is on there tight, so give yourself the best chance of taking this off by soaking it for a while. Okay, so after about an hour, I'm back at the car, and to get the joint free, I'm going to put the nut back on and one of the bolts back into the strut tower for extra support. I'm doing this so that when the taper joint comes loose, the car spring does not send this entire hub violently downwards, potentially breaking something or injuring me. Now I'm going to drop my jack completely, and now the spring is pushing against this joint with a lot of force, so a few blows with a hammer will get this loose. Okay, so there it is, the taper joint is now free. I can undo the strut bolt and undo the ball joint nut. There we are, we now have good access to the ball joint. I'm just going to cut this loose rubber material out of the way and give the area a good clean so that my press doesn't slip when I put it on. Okay, let's go get the ball joint press. Here's the ball joint press kit I used. At about 40 bucks new, they are quite cheap. In this kit, you will need the two flying saucer looking attachments here, the clamp of course, and the large and mid-sized cups. That's all. You won't need any other attachments for the SN95 Mustang. So back at the car, let's take a look at the clamp. You will see that it has an unthreaded end and a threaded end. The threaded end goes on the bottom, and you will be winding the bolt upwards. Raise the lower control arm a little with a jack to give the clamp room to fit. Then take your smaller UFO and put the side with a larger ring facing up, as it will sit on the clamp like so. Just get the bolt started in the clamp and take your larger cup and sit it onto the lower part of the control arm like so. The larger UFO goes onto the bottom and it sits on the large cup like so. Then just wind the bolt in and get everything nice and secure. So what's going to happen is as you wind the bolt in more and more, the clamp will be pushing the ball joint downwards and out of the control arm, and at some stage it will drop into this cup at the bottom. If you're on the floor like me and space is tight, this is when a 22mm crowfoot spanner comes in handy, as you can attach it to a pry bar and start winding. I'll fast forward the footage for you here so that you can see how the clamp is pushing downward and pressing out the ball joint as you wind on the bolt. And there we go, the ball joint is free. Take your press kit off and you should now have the old ball joint in your hands. Your new ball joint will come with a few parts, but all brands are slightly different. Mine is also pre-greased, which is good, so I'm going to take this over to the car and put this on. So to start with, clean out the ball joint saddle and make sure it's free of any damage. Once you're happy that everything is in good order, take a little bit of grease and run it around the receiving ring to make sure things slide in smoothly. Now take one of your UFOs and use it as a spacer to tap in the ball joint slightly, just to get things started. Now take the medium-sized cup and put it on top of the control arm, and the large UFO goes on top of that. Then put the small UFO onto the bottom of the clamp and start winding. This bottom portion of the press should sit nicely against the bottom outer edge of your new ball joint. If you wind the new ball joint in, stop once in a while to check your progress and make sure that the ball joint isn't going in crooked. If it is, flip the press around, wind out the ball joint and start again. But if all is well, just keep going until the ball joint bottoms out against the control arm. And that's it. Once the ball joint bottoms out, take the press off because you are done with it. Check that the ball joint is sitting nicely, which it is, and it's time for reassembly. Now, before you do reassemble, I made an extra step here which I think is quite important, but my camera ran out of battery, so I didn't capture it. What you want to do is put extra grease into this area here, so this area here, before you put the rubber boot back on the new ball joint. Again, my camera stopped, so I didn't capture it, but here is the next shot with the rubber boot now on and with the grease I used off to the side. So make sure you do that as well. It's an important step, I would say. Just pack this rubber boot with grease before you slide it back on. Okay, so the hub goes on next, and I like to clean old parts before I put them back on, just so that the parts around here, like the brakes and the ABS tone ring and wheel speed sensor, work as they should. Once you're happy, slide the wheel hub back on and wind on the coolest looking nut that there is. A castellated nut, of course. I need a 27mm socket for this smooth ball joint, so I'm going to get this on here nice and tight. And then I'm going to take a new locking pin and slide that in. Okay, the hub is back on, so next I'll put the ABS wheel speed sensor back in. Again, just a small E8 bolt holds this in. Okay, next let's connect the strut to the wheel hub using the two bolts. Firstly, put the sway bar drop link back into its hole on the control arm and raise the control arm up with the jack to meet the strut. Next, line up the two holes on the strut and the wheel hub and put the two bolts in. Tighten the nuts onto the bolts. And then don't forget to put the ABS cable bracket back on the strut and reconnect the wheel speed sensor wires to their brackets. At this point, tighten up the sway bar drop link bolt underneath the control arm, and then it's finally time to put the new tie rod end on. Okay, here's the new tie rod end and it comes pre-greased, so we're good to go. We're going to wind this back on the same amount using the note that we made earlier. In my case, it's 28 turns on the right hand side of this car. Once I have the right amount of turns on, I'm going to slot this back onto the wheel hub and put the coolest nut in the world back onto the thread. I do like a castellated nut. Call me weird, I don't care. I mean, just look at it. It's straight out of medieval times. Except they didn't have cars back then. Okay, so this one takes a 19mm socket, so snug it down tight. And then put the new locking pin in place. Finally, don't forget to tighten down your tie rod end to the steering rack. Just a note, you're going to want to go and get a wheel alignment once you're done because you've touched the steering geometry. Okay, at this point, it's the home stretch. The brake disc goes back on, followed by the brake caliper. The two 15mm bolts go back in and tighten down. The wheel goes back on, and you can drop your car. The ball joint and tie rod ends are done.
So here we are, guys, the next morning. We're going to go for a spin. Of course we are. Just gonna make sure that we can feel the difference. I can already hear that there's definitely the less knocking and play in the front steering now that I turn the wheel. I love jobs that when you're finished you can feel the difference. You know what I'm saying? You feel like, yeah, you've spent the money in the right place. Yeah, much nicer, much nicer. No knocking at all from the front anymore. Nice and firm. Everything's great. Still got a few groans in the back, but that's the next job. We're gonna fix those cross-axis joints next. But yeah, I think that's a successful job done. All right, let's head back and finish up. So there you go, guys. This has been a walkthrough of the steps needed to swap out the ball joints and the tie rod ends on an SN95 Mustang. A 2001 SVT Cobra Mustang in this case, but all SN95 should be exactly the same. The next step for this car will be the cross-axis joints in the rear. Those definitely need attention on this car and we'll be tackling them next, so make sure you subscribe and hit the bell if you want to know when that video will be out. But for now, I hope you're enjoying these videos. I'm documenting these jobs so that you too can perform these at home if you need to, and I'm getting this thing ready for a road safety inspection here in a few days. Alright, that's it for now. I hope that, like me, you've learned something new here today, but enough chit chat from me. Go ahead and try this at home on your car.